Amanda is getting her screen together. Good afternoon. My name is Daphne Houston, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon as we discuss our next section of Behind the Scenes, Follow the Money. I'm going to introduce you to our panel that we will have today. We have with us first Wendy McGee. She is the Executive Director at Our Daily Bread. We have Olivia Mata Williams, Director of Education, Housing, and Workforce Initiatives at United Way of Denton County. We have Hope Rogers with us from the Texas Homeless Network, COC Performance Manager. We have Courtney, and of course, I don't know how to pronounce Courtney's last name appropriately, so I will let her introduce herself and give you that information. But she's our Deputy Director of Community Services at the City of Denton, and Danny Shaw, Director of Community Services at the City of Denton. So I'll give everybody, oh, we have my bio. So there's my bio, a little bit about myself. I don't like talking about myself, but I'll say I've been in this field for about 20 years, with the last 10 years being focused on working with different homeless initiatives with different nonprofit and social service organizations. I am currently the Director of Programs at Christian Community Action. I am going on my 7th year in September. My job is just to make sure that all the programs run effective and efficiently. I have a great team that handles all of that. I previously served as the chairperson of the Texans Balance of State Continuum of Care Board, and I recently rolled off as the chairperson for the Denton County Homeless Coalition. Just in life, my job is to make sure that people are becoming the best versions of themselves, whether that's through program services or being a wife and a mom. So we have Courtney. Courtney, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Courtney Dwangara, Deputy Director for Community Services at the City of Denton. I'll keep it brief, but my career has been in nonprofit and more recently in local government. So you'll hear more about what we do and how our funding works at the city, but basically we oversee our federal funding, our HUD grants, and just general grants for the community, human services grants for nonprofits. We do a lot of work in homelessness response and initiatives at the city. And we also have everyone's favorite code enforcement in our department. And I guess I should also say I am currently the vice chair for the COC board as well.
Thank you, Courtney. Olivia?
Yes. Hi, I'm Olivia Mata Williams. I am a LMSW and an alum of our local universities. It was the joint program at TW and UNT. So proud to represent here for Denton. I actually started with United Way during my internship, and like so many other United Way employees, stayed. So their stickum here has been great. Prior to this, I was in organizational change management, and that's where I grew my love of systems change and figuring out effectiveness and efficiencies, and looking to leverage my past experience with my new social work lens in the work of education, workforce, and homelessness.
Thank you, Olivia. Wendy?
I'm Wendy McGee. I'm the Executive Director at Our Daily Bread. I have been in the nonprofit community here in Denton for more than 12 years, but have been at Our Daily Bread since the beginning of 2018. And during that time, our organization has experienced rapid growth. When I entered Our Daily Bread as the Executive Director just 5 short years ago, I was the only full-time employee, and things have really changed a lot since then. We were open 3.5 hours a day, Monday through Friday, serving a breakfast and a lunch, and then some light wraparound services And now we never close. We're open 24/7, 365 days a year, and we have a staff of approximately 40 individuals, and we have just really been intentional in working with various partners within our community to try to respond to the need around hunger and homelessness over the last few years, to really try to make the biggest impact we can to help more people recover from homelessness and move towards independent living.
Thank you, Wendy. Hope?
Hey there, I'm Hope Rogers. I'm a licensed master social worker, and I've worked in housing crisis response systems for a little over 6 years, really at all levels, from direct service to program management, and now in more systems level work. I currently serve as the COC, or Continuum of Care Performance Manager, at Texas Homeless Network. We are an Austin-based nonprofit that serves as the collaborative applicant and lead agency to the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care, which is a geographic funding and service region covered by the Continuum of Care program. We serve the largest continuum of care in terms of geography in the state of Texas, and the second largest nationally. So we cover about 84% of Texas landmass and 40% of the population. So in my role as performance manager, I lead the local competitive application process for the Continuum of Care program, and also help support the implementation and maintenance of funded programs throughout the Texas Balance of State.
Thanks, Hope. And our last panelist is Danny.
Hi, I'm Danny Shaw. I'm the Director of Community Services for the City of Denton. My work prior to coming to the city was in youth development, so I got my feet wet with kids, and been working on large-scale systems change projects since the very beginning. I'm much more happy at the higher level, or what social workers call macro level. It's very exciting to me to look at how we help improve performance in a lot of areas. I came to the city in 2012. I've been here, I guess, 10 years, just over 10 years now. I got my first chance to work in the issue of homelessness in 2015, when then Mayor Watts established a task force to look at how we could improve our housing outcomes for people experiencing homelessness, and have really, it's really taken off, the work that we're doing in the community. So I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you all today.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you to all the panelists. We have a lot of great questions that we're going to ask, and they will share some information just about following the money. So our first question, we're going to allow about 2 minutes per question, or I guess per answer per panelist. But the first question is, what are the top 3, based on amount received, sources of funding for your organization's homelessness initiatives? And then can you briefly describe the process for how you obtain that funding from the top source?
I can get us started.
Thanks, Hope.
So we are almost exclusively funded by a grant program called the HUD Continuum of Care Planning Grant, which is a source of funding that is exclusively for Continuum of Care lead agencies. So I don't know that it's that valuable to talk like that. The average organization isn't eligible for that funding. So I think instead, focusing on the largest funding sources we work with within our Continuum of Care, which generally fall into 2 pots. There's competitive grants, like the Continuum of Care grant, and then the SSVF, which is supportive services for veteran families through the VA, essentially rapid rehousing for veterans. So those are generally our largest competitive grants, and competitive, you know, I think it's in the name, but those are funds that folks compete for and are awarded based on performance. There's also a second kind of pot of funding through what's called formula grants. And those are the largest ones are the Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG, that I'm sure many folks are familiar with. the community development block grant, and home funding are all formula grants, and those are the amount of funding that can be received is based on a federal formula that looks at poverty rates and population and geography within a given community, and then communities who meet those that threshold criteria of that formula receive a direct allocation of that funding, specifically thinking of like the Emergency Solutions Grant. So that puts communities like Denton County that are not like a large metropolitan area at a disadvantage, because generally the folks or the communities that are eligible for those direct allocations are like large metropolitan areas like Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, Austin. So within the Emergency Solutions Grant, there is the state does also receive a direct allocation of funds. And those are that pot of funding is available for folks to competitively apply for, but it's such a small pool of funding compared to the overall amount that it is incredibly competitive. I think last year we had over 40 applicants in the balance of state that were unfunded in that competition. I know this year, based on the amounts that are available for our COC, and the maximum or minimum amount that an agency could apply for, we can only receive a maximum of 12 awards in our continuum of care for the Emergency Solutions Grant. And when you think, that doesn't include like direct allocations or continuing awards, but when you think about the size of our coverage area and that we serve 215 counties, 12 awards, like that math just, it doesn't add up. There's not enough to meet the need. But I would still like highly encourage folks to apply for those funding sources. The Emergency Solutions Grant competitive process is happening now. It's through the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, or TDHCA. There is an application available online that folks can apply for, and we at THN can provide technical assistance on that application. Kind of pivoting back to the competitive portion of funding. So we as THN, as I mentioned in my intro, facilitate the local application process for the continuum of care. So that's something that any eligible organization in the balance of state can apply for annually. We are gearing up to start that process here in the next couple of weeks to months. So happy to connect with anyone that's considering applying for that funding, but essentially, submitting a grant application, providing information that ensures that your organization has adequate capacity to administer those funds. Lots of other things that go into it, but I think that's the bulk of it.
Thanks, Hope.
Since it ties in, I'll go next from some of what Hope was talking about. The city of Denton is an entitlement community, which means we do have a population large enough to receive direct allocations of certain funds. So for our top three, we are a community development block grant recipient and a home investment partnership funds recipient, which means those funds come in a direct allocation under that formula to the city of Denton and to other communities around us. Again, based on the allocation that Hope had already talked about. But the other source of funding is tax dollars from the community. So our general fund is what we refer to it as. So those revenues that come in from the taxes that people pay support the number of grant programs that we have. So we're in the same position as Hope. We're typically more of a funder. We don't go out and seek a lot of grants ourselves to fund our projects. We take those entitlements in and then we pass them through to other recipients. So our nonprofit agencies are the primary recipient of our funding. And then we also allocate funding to individual housing development organizations in the community as well to help with our affordable housing processes. So that's us, our top three. The largest thing that we're funding is our homelessness initiatives in the city. It's received or housing. So one of the other sources of funding that we've had recently that I just want to talk about that's not typically available to us is emergency funding, like COVID relief dollars that have come in through the three different acts that have passed through Congress in the last 2.5, 3 years now. And so our most recent is our tenant-based rental assistance grant, which is like rapid rehousing, helping people with housing assistance or rental assistance who are experiencing homelessness.
Thanks, Danny.
I can go next. It's kind of
Okay.
the perfect segue for us. As I said, things have changed dramatically for Our Daily Bread over the last 5 years, and a lot of that has been in our funding sources and our budget. I guess in 2018, we had an operating budget of $975,000, with 50% of that being in kind. So it was about $450,000 that was actually dollars that were required to come through the door to fund our operating expenses. This year in 2023, we're looking at about a $3.7 million operating budget. So that's a pretty significant jump over 5 years. Because this year we do not have a baseline to look at, since we are in a completely different location. We have a completely different model, going from just operating a few hours a day or or overnight to being 24/7 and to being a comprehensive low barrier shelter resource center and community kitchen. I wanted to look at the last 4 years and where we were receiving most of our dollars. And so I think it's important for us to talk about the in-kind dollars that we receive. So if we look from 2018 to 2022, we received $4 million in in-kind donations. Those are donations of food, non-food items, hygiene items, supplies for our kitchen, all the way to our restrooms, to our office supplies, and then furniture and housing items for newly housed guests. And so most all of the meals that we provide are funded primarily through donations of in-kind from grocery retailers. And that is through our partnership with Tarrant Area Food Bank. And so daily we go out and we pick up food items from Kroger, Sprouts, Target, Walmart, and we've picked up a few other grocery retailers since moving to our new location, because the demand for services has increased significantly and we have added an extra meal offering. And then if you look next, so that's about $4 million that we've received over the last 4 years. And again, that is we have to work through Tarrant Area Food Bank. We do reporting monthly or weekly, I'm sorry, for the food that we do receive and the food that we pick up. And you may be wondering how we get that $4 million. We assign a value based on category and poundage for food. And so I would say we're probably underreporting pretty significantly, because 2016 was the last time that we assessed those values. And if any of us have been to the grocery store since then, we know that, yeah, it's about what, $10 for lunch meat. So everything has gone up a lot, but we have not adjusted our values as of yet. That'll be a project for probably next year. But behind the in-kind donations, it's going to be public grants. So primarily from the city of Denton, and some from the county, dollars that flowed through for COVID money, so CARES Act or ARP dollars that came through. And then, and some of the things that Danny was talking about, the TVRA or the home funds, the dollars that come in from taxpayers. And then I don't think we've been the recipient of any CDBG dollars to this point, but it's quite a significant amount. And then we can't, because we are in a new location on Loop 288, and we are here under a management services agreement to operate the shelter here. The city is responsible for purchasing the land and the building and completing the renovations. And that was quite a significant amount of dollars that they put into making this a really nice, welcoming comprehensive place for people to come to receive services so that they can try to, access everything under one roof. We hope that, that increased accessibility and the efficiency that we can find and the ability to be able to partner across the continuum and with other agencies to serve people in one location will help more people to exit homelessness and to move towards independent living and permanent housing. But that amount over the last 4 years from public grants is about $2.2 million that has come in. And just as an aside, when I came in 2018, we had applied for our first grant from the city of Denton, and it funded a partial program coordinator salary, and that was it. So it was $15,000. So things have changed dramatically. Right now, those grants have funded food, shelter, program salaries, and some security salaries. And then thirdly, our individuals, just people in the community giving to support the work that we're doing here at Our Daily Bread. And these are dollars that are coming through the door. So I'm not even talking about the number of volunteers that give their time. And if you were to quantify that into a dollar amount, you'd be looking at probably $3 million over the course of the last 4 years. But dollars that have come in the door just from individuals are about 1.3 million. And we do that by trying to get out and talk to people about the work we're doing. And then we have social media efforts, and people can give online, or they can come into the organization and give, or they can mail a check to us. But that individual giving does not include our fundraising dollars. So that's just direct support from individuals that are supporting the work we're doing here at Our Daily Bread.
Thanks, Wendy.
I think it's timely that United Way is going last, because I think we're a bit in each funder and awardee, if that's the proper terminology. We are recipients for homelessness services of both funding from City of Denton and with the help of working with THN, we also receive HUD COC funding. But another hat, Wendy, since you mentioned where you're receiving your funding resources, is on our operational side. We received, United Way was the fiscal agent for the unprecedented ERA money that came through during COVID. And that really gave us a different kind of insight on homeless prevention, as that money was geared towards rental assistance through the pandemic. And there were 2 sets of programs that came through, and that's been over 40 million expended just through those federal dollars into our county. From a funding perspective, we have 2 municipalities that have been supporting our homelessness initiatives consistently, City of Denton and City of Louisville. And United Way has a slightly different role, as we're not exactly direct service the same way in Our Daily Bread or Giving Grace or CCA would be. And our role has been primarily to bring a coordinated entry system in and then expand what that can look like with other organizations. So the dollars coming through help support our coordinated entry specialist, our housing navigation and landlord engagement initiatives. And another piece is our barriers fund. And this is one of our best kept, not so secret funds that I think in this spirit or in this transition of federal funding ending, and we're looking at where do nonprofits, where do clients go to help support their stability for their housing or to gain housing. The Barriers Fund is the one fund that does support that. And currently, City of Denton and City of Louisville both contribute. They're the primary funding source for that. And just to talk about the barriers fund a little bit, if you guys don't mind. This is the fund of last resort. The nonprofits in our community have access to apply to this when their programs don't have funding for things like critical documents, things like rental deposits, rental assistance, risk mitigation with landlords. Oftentimes, these clients are facing the most barriers to get into housing. And the Barriers Fund is intended to help bridge that gap to get them into housing or help them maintain their housing. In addition, the funds can also be used for workforce support. So let's say your client is recently housed and they have a new job and they're needing new equipment or new uniforms. Nonprofits are able to apply to the Barriers Fund to help bridge that gap. Same thing for basic household supplies. The food pantries have been so critical in having a place to direct. But if the food pantries don't have some of those basic resources, cleaning supplies, toilet paper, the Barriers Fund can also help with that. It is a fund of huge impact. Overall, since inception, we've helped 448 households, and it's about an average of $530-ish per person. And I think when we talk about no dollar amount or no donation is too small, $5, $25 can go to pay to get someone's ID. When you enter homelessness, you don't think about the things that you lose until you need them. And this whole concept of how do I get help and how do I get back on my feet, and not having a state ID is a pretty critical barrier to overcome. So in terms of funding, our biggest homelessness supports are, yes, the Barriers Fund that then help people regain stability, but also the personnel that are out engaging with these systems day in and day out. Our coordinated entry specialist, Hope used to fill that position. Andy now fills that position. They have a big job in not only being a front door agency, but also figuring out how the system is changing and moving, and what other supports need to be built out to continue to adapt to the rising numbers and homelessness that we're experiencing right now.
Thank you, Olivia. So our question 2, a lot of you kind of touched on it when you went through your answers, but I'll go ahead and give you all the opportunity to share. What are the top 3 expenses that this funding goes towards? In other words, where does the money for these homeless initiatives go?
I'll start.
Thanks, Wendy.
Sure. Again, I looked back over the last 4 years, and I can give you a little perspective too on what we're budgeting for this current year, but we're only through the first quarter, so what we are projecting and what the actuals are may be a little different. But for the last 4 years, our largest expense has been to support our meal program. And that's roughly $3.9 million has gone into supporting delivering hot meals to people who are experiencing homelessness and or food insecurity. Just a little perspective on the number of meals that we've served in the last 4 years. It's 750,000. And since opening our doors in 2020, we're at about 1.75 meals. So you can see that the majority of those meals have been delivered in the last few years. But when we factor in that cost, it's the actual cost that we do pay for meals, for supplies for the kitchen, but also the value of the in-kind that we receive that goes right back out into a meal for our guest. And then our second largest expense is going to be salaries. And over the last 4 years, that's been approximately $3.2 million, with 2.4 of that being primarily programmatic expenses. So very little on the admin side. And I will say, even if it's an administrative expense, I still clean toilets and I still will put on a hairnet or go to receiving or, change a shelter bed and get new sheets on there or do laundry or, within a small nonprofit, it takes everyone kind of pitching in and doing all they can. So even though you may be in an admin role, you still have to get out there and deliver services from time to time, which is actually, I love doing that part of it. I just don't get to do it enough here lately. But when I talk about programming dollars, that includes our staff that is working in shelter, our staff that is working in the kitchen to deliver the meals, case managers that are helping our guests with an individualized plan that helps them to move forward and to exit homelessness, and then our safety and security team, because it's really important that we are looking out for the safety of everyone who comes into our building. And then the third largest expense is going to be programmatic expenses. So some of the things that Olivia was talking about, we assist with transportation for our guests. Those are bus passes or gasoline vouchers, and that can be to get to appointments, or someone may have just gotten a job and they need assistance in getting to that job until they can become self-sufficient. We also assist with prescription medication. So for our guests that are unable to afford their prescription medication, we will help with that. We also help with identification, so birth certificates, social security cards, driver's license or Texas state IDs. Olivia spoke a little bit about that, but that's one of the first things you need to be able to begin to move forward and to really kind of take the first steps out of homelessness. You can't get a job without identification. You can't rent an apartment. You can't get social service benefits, and sometimes you can't even get assistance from other agencies without identification. This also includes housing assistance, homelessness prevention, all of those programmatic expenses, diversion. We do assist guests in relocating or getting back to family or another location that provides stability. So maybe they have a job waiting on them, or there's housing in another state, and we can help facilitate getting them there. Sometimes we utilize the Barriers Fund for that as well too. So Olivia talked a little bit about the Barriers Fund. And then clothing. So, work uniforms. Folks get a job. They don't have the dollars to go and purchase the uniform they have to wear, or the work boots, or the non-skid shoes, or whatever that may be. And so that's all part of the programmatic expenses that make up our third largest expense. And over the last 4 years, that's been about about $750,000. And then again, the number of supportive services that we've delivered over the last 4 years are about 180,000 supportive services. Just really quick, when we jump to projected dollars for what we are looking at as our top expenses for this current budget year, our salaries are our largest expense. So again, we've gone to 40 staff members, and that's about $2.1 million in salaries, with the majority of that being programmatic. Very little of that is administration. And then meals, the cost for meals is about $700,000 is what we are projecting for this year. And then programmatic costs, we're projecting about $450,000 for this year.
Thanks,
Well,
Wendy.
I'll go next, but I won't be as impressive as what Wendy said. Was a lot of fast facts there, Wendy. I'm highly impressed. So I'll pull the curtain back a little bit and answer it for the city of Denton. I think it would be helpful to provide the context in which how funds are allocated once they come into the city. So we have an advisory committee called the Community Services Advisory Committee that oversees our formula grants, as you heard Hope mention, our community development block grant, our home investment partnership or home funding, CDBG and home, and then those general fund dollars that Danny mentioned for an annual application process through our community development grant program. Any other funding that we have come through, whether it be other general fund dollars that council is dedicated for homelessness initiatives or homelessness services, or any other funding sources, like you heard, you've heard mentioned, like American Rescue Plan, emergency funding. Those are all allocated and prioritized in different ways. I won't go into those details because that's very convoluted, but they go through our advisory committee, often through an application process. If they're not directly designated by council, there's an application process that we go through. And then we have a committee who reviews those applications and makes funding recommendations onto council. And then in terms of exactly where the funding goes, here at the City of Denton, the majority of any funding that comes through goes back out in the community. Any kind of new emergency or disaster funding that we get, there are always kind of admin caps. We try to pass those on to the agencies that or subrecipients of funding for different reasons. Most importantly, just because we know they'll be utilized often more efficiently at with one of our private partners to get those funds out the door to meet whatever emergent need they're there to meet, but also because fun fact for you, if we've got positions staffed at the city and we get new funding that comes in, we can't just replace what's been allocated for their salary with grant funding. That's called supplanting, and that's bad. So all that to say, we have a funding allocation process that we follow. Ultimately, council has the final say on when an agreement comes to them, whether or not to approve funding for different nonprofits in the community. And then as much as we can, the admin gets passed through onto our subrecipients to make sure as much funds as possible are going out in the community.
Thanks, Courtney.
I think for us at Texas Homeless Network, almost all of our internal funding goes to support our work of carrying out the responsibilities of a continuum of care, which include maintaining an inclusive governance structure. So maintaining like clear and transparent COC-wide policies that define and advance our work, COC-wide committees that focus on specific HUD priorities or priorities of the COC that help drive the needle forward on making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring, maintaining and providing staff support to the a COC board of directors that Courtney currently serves on, and Daphne and Danny have served on previously. Leading a local application process, providing technical assistance and training to providers in communities throughout the state that are working to address homelessness in their given community. So working with folks at all levels, from direct service staff to leadership, and providing training and strategy around work to end homelessness. Within the communities that we work with in the continuum of care, the three funding sources that I work with most commonly with our funded agencies are the Continuum of Care Program, SSVF, or Supportive Services for Veteran Families, and the Emergency Solutions Grant. And the biggest expenses within those funding sources are generally like a rental or housing subsidy for a person experiencing homelessness, typically paired with a utility subsidy and supportive services, in addition to holistic case management, with the intention of moving someone from a place of housing crisis to stability. In addition to that, homelessness prevention funds, which is most commonly funded through the Emergency Solutions Grant. So funds that keep someone in their home and prevent an episode of homelessness. I think we all know it's significantly cheaper to prevent homelessness than to resolve an episode of homelessness. So those funds are really critical in the communities that we work with. And I think lastly would be emergency shelter expenses and operating costs for shelters.
Thanks, Hope.
Hope, I'm glad to follow you because I think our COC grant with THN definitely align in terms of our positions. And just to add on to the last answer that I gave, I touched on the staff that the COC grant helps fund. And those programs are critical to the housing crisis response system and keeping it a centralized and coordinated unit. And so the coordinated entry specialist, from our perspective at United Way, from a backbone support side, is out in the community, building relationships, not only with front door agencies and direct service providers, but also with community partners. This could be police departments, rural areas, churches, anyone that has touches neighbors who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of experiencing homelessness. And so for that coordinated entry specialist to be able to keep a pulse on homelessness that is now becoming more visible. I hear it from lay people all the time saying, oh, I'm seeing it more and more. I think we have, as a community, we have a really hot opportunity to help bring more awareness and action to these initiatives, and that coordinated entry specialist has that role to do that. Earlier, I mentioned the housing navigation and the landlord engagement, also under the COC grant. That role for housing navigation as this unicorn of bridging landlords and high barriered applicants who are experiencing homelessness to get housed and what that looks like. Amanda has been serving in that role for several years now, and we can tell you that getting someone with high barriers into housing, even when they have a voucher, can take a minimum of 6 months. Wendy talked about how critical the IDs were. If you don't have an ID, you don't have an entry anywhere. If you don't have an address. So there have been backbone support initiatives that have helped iron some of those barriers out. But I think it's important to recognize how critical and how vital those roles are in the community, and that housing navigation has built up a database of landlords throughout the entire county, and some even slightly outside of the county, for other nonprofits who have their own housing navigators to work with. They help with risk mitigation dollars to say, hey, we know we have a high risk applicant coming in, but if we can leverage this risk mitigation insurance policy, will you take this risk? And the bigger thing that Amanda has done in this position is she has built amazing relationships with the landlord. So they know that they can call her if they're having problems with a tenant. Being able to expand this kind of staff support, it's not just a role, it is the entire relationship that both the housing navigators and the coordinated entry specialists have within the community. So in terms of our staffing, that's where a bulk of this goes. One of the other staff that I think is critical to this role is our data management specialist. Our current person in this position has just done an amazing job transforming the so what of the data. And so on United Way's website is a homelessness data dashboard that gives you a monthly look, at a glance look of what's happening in our entire county. It tells you how many people are coming in each month into our coordinated entry system, as well as how many people are being housed or leaving. I think having this data dashboard is critical to so many of the other funding opportunities that nonprofits also participate in. They can go to the dashboard, they can utilize this to help give a state of what homelessness looks like from a school district perspective, or just from their backyard. So even though we're not technically in direct service and we don't see clients day in and day out the way an Our Daily Bread would. We are very much client adjacent and look to continue to support however we can in filling in those gaps.
Thank you, Olivia. So our final question for our panelists, I'm going to call on Danny Shaw first because she has to hop off the call. But the question is, what is one thing that if it was fully funded could make a transformational difference in making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring?
Yeah, housing ends homelessness. So for me, the question is the short term of having the fully funded emergency funding we need to help people who are in need right now, but to have the funding we need to wreck it Ralph on the whole housing system. We really need to look at huge systems change there. And so my dream would be able to fully fund that conversation. So thanks for letting me join, and I apologize I have to jump off early. I look forward to watching the rest of the conversation later.
Thank you, Danny.
I'll go next. If that's okay. I'm going to say healthcare. I mean, if you think about how many of us who are housed might be hesitant to access healthcare for financial reasons. If we have a true emergency or just something that goes on for a long time, just very practically speaking, on an individual level, people experiencing literal homelessness or at risk of homelessness are going to neglect that, right? And often we also see that healthcare can be a reason, healthcare costs and debt can be a reason that people fall into homelessness. And so both on the financial and physical health sides, I think if there were access to free or very affordable healthcare, we'd have a lot less folks, falling on hard times and just not being able to prioritize their personal health in a way that I think everyone should be able to.
Thanks, Courtney.
I'm going to answer this question without really answering the question because I think Danny and Courtney, hit the nail on the head. But I think, when it comes to addressing any complex issue, funding really isn't worth much unless there's a really clear community-wide plan in place for how it's going to be used. I work with lots of communities that have diverse funding streams and have a wealth of homelessness interventions available to them, but they're working in silos and they're not communicating with each other, and they're not able to effectively spend their funds on an annual basis. So I think that obviously we need to invest in the development of affordable housing and increase access to healthcare, but that is only going to go so far unless folks are working with each other to create a really streamlined plan. I think in addition to that, it's really hard to make any meaningful change unless we also address the root issues around race equity and health inequity, and all of the inequities that contribute to our system and lead to experiencing homelessness. So I think it's multi-layered and it goes beyond just funding. But I think at the root, affordable housing would be my core.
Thanks, Hope.
I'll go next, but I have to say I struggled with this question because they're funding one issue or one reason that people are experiencing homelessness or one barrier just does not fully solve the problem, because we know that everyone is individualized and everyone has their own experiences, and you can't put each individual person into one bucket and say, oh, if we fully funded this, then we'd be able to make a dramatic difference in homelessness. So I think what we're, and on that same note, trust and rapport and being able to understand trauma-informed care and looking through that lens. And as we work with guests who are experiencing homelessness, fully centralizing all services, I think is probably the best way that we can make a dramatic difference in reducing homelessness. We are on track with the shelter that the city of Denton has been so instrumental in funding. We have the facility now to be able to bring all services on site under one roof to increase accessibility. This speaks to the inequities that Hope is talking about. And it also, you know, having a place where people feel safe, and they trust the folks that are there, that are assisting them, is just so critical, and just a holistic approach to being able to work with people experiencing homelessness. And this is not done by one agency. So it's not Our Daily Bread providing all of the services, from basic services, shelter, food, hygiene, clothing, to wellness, you know, physical wellness, mental and behavioral health, recovery and detox programs, enrichment classes that, and just a sense of community that help provide emotional wellness, or support emotional wellness for guests, income support, job training, GED, work programs, benefits assistance, all of those supportive services that Olivia talked about, that we talked a little bit about that, and then transitional housing, and then a pathway out of homelessness into housing, and then support after people leave the shelter or they exit transitional housing into a place of their own. So I think other communities have done this, and they've seen, you know, a significant impact in providing fully centralized services in one location, and a holistic approach to helping people experiencing homelessness. And so it really is having the facility that we have here on the Loop at Our Daily Bread, but collaborating with all of these other service providers that can provide expertise and service, and just some of these things that I've mentioned. And so that's really big. But I think for us to really be able to make the greatest impact, that's what it's going to take. So we're excited that we have the opportunity to do this now, and we are really looking forward to partnering with more agencies across our community and across the continuum to really help more people experiencing homelessness to get to whatever their happy place is, and that place of independence. And so yeah. So really, I think I answered it, but I really didn't answer it. But
Thanks, Wendy.
If I can just have liberty, I think all of the answers, yes, all of the above. And I think trauma-informed care, I think the approach, all of that. Recently, I was chatting with an officer, and she shared this story with me last week, and I think this sums this up. That she said, everybody in this county or in this community, she's telling a story, everybody in this community found this problem, and of people that were falling into their creek, and everyone would go down and help and pull people out of the creek, and pull people out of the creek. And this just happened day after day. And she's then says, but then nobody stopped to ask where all the water was coming from and how people were getting in there to begin with. And I think that's the beauty of these conversations, and then working with our partners, because everyone spoke to the upstream approach in what we're all working towards, and the whole collective impact model being implemented. And so I just appreciate everyone's answers, because yes, housing, supportive services, funding, healthcare, everything that encompasses what it takes to be a human in this world are what we're trying to solve for, and what we're working towards day in and day out.
Thank you, Olivia. Well, we got tons of great information. I'm sure everybody wants to know, what can we do next? I did not see any questions in the chat, but we have about 4 minutes. So if you have any questions, please share them, and we can get you an answer back. But ways to get involved, connecting with these organizations. Our Daily Bread, CCA is on here, City of Denton, the Homeless Coalition, just different homeless initiatives. One thing that I think our community does really well is we have learned to work together, like all of the things that Wendy talked about, and like how do we work together as a community? We just are very strong in that way, and I'm so grateful to be part of this community to do that. Point in time count, you see that's highlighted, that's a big one. We need everybody involved. If you have any questions about that, we can definitely make sure to get that information out to you as well, because we want as many people as possible. And if you're applying for any of these funding opportunities that were mentioned today, it is required that you participate in the point in time count. So if you didn't know that, now you do. Make sure you get signed up. We start planning very early, and the official count is in January. We still have about 3 more minutes. If you have any questions, you can put it in the chat or come off mute and ask the question. No questions?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to remind everyone that this is part of a continuing series that we're holding this year. And our next panel discussion will be in late August or early September, looking specifically at lived experience. And our panelists will all be people who have lived as people experiencing homelessness at some point in their lives.
Thanks, Mary. So this slide has all the links to the different organizations. And Olivia, can you drop the link for Barriers Fund and a little, oh, it's right here too, sorry, I had it covered up. But if you have any questions about how to give to the Barriers Fund, you can go directly to the link here. And we are always looking for donations. Like Olivia said, any donation is helpful. The amount of things that the Barriers Fund has been able to help individuals with, even being part of that committee, I see the requests come in, and without the Barriers Funds, we would not have the ability to house as many people as we have, the ability to keep people in housing, the ability to keep people working or get them started working, or just get basic documentation such as identification, birth certificates, just all of those things. But we do it together as a community. And so I just want to thank everyone for joining the call today. And I hope everybody has a great afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It was a great panel discussion. Lots of good information.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you all very much.